Okay, this video is I'm just going to give you a brief review of what I expect from the data section of your paper. Again, the size of that section and so forth is in the item number in the syllabus. Now, like in the last video where I described hypotheses and so forth, you know, make sure you read that chapter number 4. This about data is chapter number 6. Now, there's some stuff in here that you know is not necessarily relevant to exactly what we're doing, like data collection. We already have the data, so we don't have to worry about collecting it. I'm already giving it to you. But in writing your data section, I want you to pay particular attention to a few things. Number one, you have to tell me where the data comes from, and that citation that citation is somewhere in item number 4. I'm not going to tell you where. I'm going to have you look for it. So where does the data come from? You need to tell me what type of data is it? We went through types of data several videos ago, and I want you to tell me what type of data it is. I want you to give me a thorough description of the data. So for instance, if it's cross-sectional data, I want you to tell me what it covers. What are the individuals being covered? You don't have to give me names of each individual, but tell me how many there are. If there's a time component to the data, what years are covered? What if years aren't covered and months are, what months are covered, etc. So I want you to go ahead and give me a thorough description of the data you're working with. Also, obviously things like number of observations in the data set, etc., are also very important. Now, you don't have to give me any information on the entire data set. In other words, all of the variables. Remember, you're just picking 4 variables, and I want information on those 4 variables. I don't need information on the entire data set. So you don't have to say this is a data set of 20 variables or something like that, because you're not going to use all 20. So be smart about what you're talking about and what you're writing. This research is only going to pertain to 4 variables. I want you to give me descriptions of those 4 variables. You're also going to have to give me your reasons why in the data section, why you think the calibration and omitted variables are important variables to the relationship, or the calibration variable, why it's a valid calibration variable, and your omitted variable, why you think that the relationship between your dependent and variable of interest is going to be affected by that variable. Again, using economic sense, okay? Use economic common sense when you try to describe that relationship. Read chapter 6 though. Go ahead and read the whole thing. Even though the data collection part isn't on there, it's a small part of chapter 6. The rest you're going to find quite useful. Pay particular attention to this section in chapter 6 of the accuracy of the data. You need to let me know or describe, because remember, I'm your professor and I gave you this data, but what you're actually writing a paper here for is the general public. So you need to, or policymakers, so you need to outline particular caveats regarding the accuracy of the data that you're using. And you can look at your data set again. When I get a data set and I'm doing research, I literally will stare at the data set for days and days before I even run the first regression. And all I'm doing is getting a feel of what data is in that data set. If I'm working with different countries, what countries are being covered, okay? Because there's a huge difference in the accuracy of the data that comes from the United States versus the accuracy of the data that comes from, say, Bolivia, okay? There's just going to be a huge difference in that data. And I've got to think, what sort of data am I working with? And I want you to outline that. I want you to think about that anyway. The accuracy of the data. Usability of the data. Now, this data is quite usable, but I want you to read this usability of the data section and think about the design of the data, the style of the data, the time periods covered, again, the periodicity, what do you see anything that stands out about that data that might be somewhat puzzling to you? So for instance, assume that we're looking at growth rates of economies across the world, and so we're looking at growth rates of different countries. If I saw a country with a growth rate, an annual growth rate of, say, negative 20%, that would throw up some interesting alarms in my head. Not that that's not maybe an accurate measurement of their growth rate, was that their economy actually shrank by 20% in 1 year. Not that that's not an accurate number, but it's something interesting to talk about, to say, we have a country, just want to let you know, we have a country here that has a substantially negative annual growth rate in it. And talk about how that may actually influence your results. Will that tend to skew your estimates a little bit, the estimates of your estimators, things like that. So the bottom line is, when you're doing this data section, when you're writing this data section, make sure that you think about this data. When I read what you write, I'm going to be looking for whether you studied this data set, whether you know everything there is to know, every dimension and every detail of this data set before you even run the first regression.